Well, good evening. I am Anna Elizabeth von Engelberg. I am the Kingdom Equestrian Officer for Antir. I live in TerraPomaria and have lived in the summits all but 1 year of my SCA experience. I would also like to include my husband, whose SCA name is William Brannon, and he's going to just cut in for parts of this presentation too as we talk through it. So welcome. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so that you guys can see it too. So we're going to talk about, this started out as a could we do a ground crew in the SCA, and as we worked through it, it was difficult to divorce some of the history and learning about horses from that actual job. And so we have included some of that in this as well. So some of our goals tonight are to help you understand a little bit more about horses, a little bit more about horses in the SCA, and then a little bit more about how to be involved with horses in the SCA. Horses 101, horses are neither dragons nor Labradors. A lot of people are very afraid of horses, and we understand that and try to help people get over that fear. And also, people think that they're like big dogs, and that is also not the case. They are prey animals, and we treat them differently than we do dogs. How's those pictures looking? Because the Labrador one freaked me out.
I just took a picture of it, and I'm going to put it on my Facebook page.
All right, so the first thing we do want to talk about is that horses are prey animals. And so every horse is an individual. But in general, horses are prey animals. And so they are either going to fight or they're going to flee. So the fight versus flight. And so the things that we look for as equestrians and what ground crew need to look for are they relaxed? Does their body look relaxed? Do they look interested in something, or are you looking at them thinking, oh, they look like they're going to run away? And their ears and their eyes really are kind of the window to the soul. And so the pictures that are there are two of our horses that have passed on. The one with the blaze and the big teeth, or the star and the big teeth, is Trask. He was my Arab. And then the other one is William. He was our thoroughbred. And they were, you look at that picture and you think that my Arab was a dragon, right? And he really wasn't. They were actually playing. So this is one of those moments where you'd look at that, and if you didn't know that particular horse, you'd want to be like, yeah, I'm not going to really approach that horse, just from that expression. And then of course you can see them loving on each other in the second picture. So I have a couple of pictures to share. And so just to show you some of the different expressions of horses, and some of them are subtle and some of them are not so subtle. And so all three of these horses have what we lovingly call the mare stare. And because mares sometimes get a little particular about their personal space. And so in every one of these pictures, so if we look at the top right one with, that's a paint horse, and that horse, ears are flat back. Yeah, the eye is looking at you like, so coming after you if you don't get away from me. And so that you can see the ears are flat back, eyes aren't looking calm and relaxed. There's white around the eye. The horse in the center has got more of a, I'm not really interested in you look. Nostrils are kind of pinched together. The eyes don't look quite so bad, but the ears are saying, yeah, I'm not real happy with you right now. And then we have our picture on the left, and yes, I do have permission for this picture. Those two horses are unhappy with each other because they're in each other's space. And you can, again, tell that. Look at the ears, look at their eyes, and then look at the rider. It's a very similar expression. Troy, did you have anything you wanted to add to the, excuse me, William, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
No, that's pretty accurate. And all of these cases, the eyes are large and open, which means that they're paying attention. Even the middle one, which is pensive and disinterested, but the eyes are still large and open. But when you see white, when you look at the horse's eyes and see white, it's usually a bad sign. The horse is You're normally seeing the color, the iris of the eye, but if you see white, especially all the way around the eye, that's a real good time to be out of reach.
Now, with the caveat, because there's always a caveat with horses, there are some horses that actually naturally their irises are smaller, and so you actually, or actually their eyes are bigger. Irises are the same size, and so you do see some white. We actually have a horse on the property where we can see some of her white, and that's just how she is even when she's happy. So again, always a caveat with horses and with people, right? And then just looking at their faces in general. We've got some different expressions here, 5 different horses. And so on the, we've got on the far right, I'm trying to remember which horse that was, Troy. I don't remember who that was. But he looks interested. His ears are perked forward. He's looking straight ahead like, hey, I'm checking this out, but it looks interesting. And then the second horse from the right was an Arab stallion that we saw down in Arizona. And he was checking things out, but if you look around his eye, there are some wrinkles there. And he's kind of like, oh, so take a look at his eye and then the horse to his left. That horse there, that's Trask, again, my Arab. His eyes look more relaxed. And so there's that facial expression, like wrinkle around the eye right here. There's a little concern there. And then Jupiter's sleeping and Orion is yawning. And so those are just totally relaxed horses who are just hanging out.
So adding to that, a horse that looks at you evenly with both eyes is bringing you into focal view, and that's a sign of interest. The horse on the right is interested in you and what you're doing in this particular shot. Whatever's going on in front, they have an interest in it. The one here to the left of that is worried. That's a look of worry, and they try to look at the object out of one eye more than the other. Usually it's the left eye that they try to look out of, which is why horses tend to turn their left side to you if they don't know you. They'll put their right side to you if they do trust you. That Arab that we're talking about right there attempted to kill Nancy just a few minutes after we took this picture.
No, that was a different one.
It was a different one? Okay, it was same property, same situation, but that horse came out of over top of the thing and attempted to bite her as she walked by. Yeah. So it's if you don't know the animal, caution is always advised.
Yeah, that was the nice one. He was very sweet. All right, so there's a little, and that is like quick, short, but if you're interested, we are happy to have you come out to our place. We are outside, we are vaccinated. If you want to meet our horses, we can, talk more about those facial expressions. And it would not be an SCA event, it would just be meeting our horses. So horses at events. So SCA equestrians are very protective. And sometimes people feel that we set ourselves apart from the rest of the event. And there are reasons why we are more protective, because we're protective of our horses. We've got these living creatures that are very big and they get scared and they can cause a lot of damage to themselves, to people, to things. And we're also protective of people who want to learn but aren't knowledgeable yet. And so we, try to be like, hey, how can we help you when people walk through, or any questions, or just trying to be out there. And if somebody approaches and is petting a horse and we don't know them, we're going to approach them and say, how can we help you? But because we really want to share, we just worry. Fingers can look a lot like carrots to some horses. This finger was broken by a horse because I held out my hand and I didn't quite get it open wide enough. There was a carrot in my hand, but he got my finger instead. So it can happen. So if you ever have a question, you go to an event and there's horses, there is always going to be somebody there to answer questions for you, to introduce you to their horses. I love to introduce my horses. That picture there is, I'm on Orion, who is our Morgan Frisian Cross, and Troy's on Jupiter, who is our Lipizzaner. And always happy to introduce those two horses because I think they're amazing. So horses at events, we do a lot of things with our horses at events. And, sorry, trying to pull up a link here. So we do, on our horses, we do games. We do martial games where we use swords or lances or bows. There's mounted combat and mounted fencing called Brosfechten, and jousting, there's archery. So all of those martial activities are done on horseback. And you'll see there the picture on the far right is a jousting run. And we, at this time, we're using what's called foam tip jousting, but actually people are using wood lances now as well. The picture below that is actually our society equestrian officer, Arabella, and that is a heads run, so using swords. We also like to show our horses off, and so we do things like ride before the prince, which is basically showing the horse off in the best ability with different moves and different types of things in front of royalty. You're showing it off before someone in royalty to see it, show how great your horse is. We do parades and we'll do processions. So that picture, so there's Acacia, if I count as Acacia on Orion. And then the picture below that, I actually pulled off the full SCA equestrian page. And processions are a lot of fun. You get to lead the royalty into court and they look fantastic when we do it. There's also driving. That's something that is relatively small in the SCA, but we've got some people who like to drive and show off their horses that way. We also have what is called the riderless horse ceremony within our kingdom. And I want to go ahead and paste this link for you in the chat so that you can read about it. But every September, we honor our fallen with this ceremony, and the ladies of the Rose and Valorous estate, so our former queens and princesses, will lead a horse. A horse is chosen and led, and then the queen will add a ribbon for a tassel for those that we have lost for that year. And it is a beautiful ceremony. If you've never seen it, you can take a look at that link and to get a little bit more information about it. So putting on an equestrian event is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of people. And most of the time, our riders will ride and then they'll work on the field. But we also have people who are simply ground crew, and we've got 2 levels of ground crew. And so that's what Clovis had hoped that I would talk about tonight. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about, what that can look like, even if you don't really know a lot about horses. So this is an event called Hocktide down in Glendoofin that we used to run when we lived down there. And so you can see that's not even half the participants, but you can see that there's as many people on the ground as there are on horseback. This is the actual definition or what's in the Book of Horse for junior ground crew. And so you just have to reach the age of participation, and that is youth participation. And that at this, is it 8 at this point, Troy, William?
Last I heard, yes.
Yeah. So that person can be inside the boundaries of an equestrian field while the equestrian activities are taking place. And they can reset equipment, and they can walk in front of a procession. They can't lead a horse, but they can walk in front of a procession with a bell or whatever to let the populace know that a progress is happening. And then the equestrian marshal in charge can always, if they see that this person can handle weapons, can hand weapons. But normally junior ground crew is really, you're going to reset field equipment. You're going to keep people back, off of the lines. You're going to walk to help and just help with the general operation. And yeah, sometimes they have to pick up horse poo as well. So that's part of this too. William, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, the primary difference between the junior and senior ground crew is the weapon handling. It's not just that you understand how the weapons are used, but you understand horses and riders and their relationships well enough to approach horses with weapons in your hand. This is a skill that goes a bit beyond just walking around and resetting elements, and it just requires a slightly higher experience level is all.
And so an example of that, Earl DeVeef, who's one of our good friends, is not a horseback rider. And yet he is senior ground crew because he understands weapons and he understands horses. He has no interest in riding horses, but because he likes horses, he is involved in this way. And I also managed to get Viscount Joffrey to help be ground crew as well at one of the crowns that we were at, because he could be. So here's some examples of what some of our games look like. And it's a lot of fun, but we have this first picture here is Sir William on Orion, who this was a heads run, but we put cabbage up so that he could chop at the cabbage with his wooden sword. The one in the upper right hand is called Quintain, and that is a training for jousting. It allows you to get control of your lance. It allows your horse to get used to things loud hitting off of the lance. And then the bottom right is what's called a rings run. And that one helps with your aim, ability to put that lance, and this in particular is a ring lance, put it where it needs to be able to pick up that ring, get your horse used to it with long sticks around their faces. And what we'll do is we'll put all of these together into what's called a challenge course so that we can do all of these things and show off the prowess of our horses. So here is one of the videos that we took. And so we did several videos for just the particular game, with showing what it looks like to walk up to a horse, hand up a weapon, and then what the game itself would look, what the activity looks like. So one of the things that I would like to point out is how she approached the horse. He made the horse stop and stand still, and that is required unless there is a specific understanding between the ground crew and the rider in a certain specific situation. But normally, if you are ground crew, you would wait for the rider to get their horse under control and completely stopped before you would approach the horse. Also note that as she walked up there, she didn't do so quickly, but she also didn't do so slowly and carefully, because sometimes that makes people look like predators, which then also can freak the horse out. So she just simply kept an eye on the horse, waited till it had stopped, and then walked up normally, and then handed the weapon to the rider. One of the things to also note is that Sir William made sure to have his lance straight up in the air as he was approaching the ground crew. If you have a rider coming at you with the weapon down and in any way could be dangerous for you, you move out of the way. Riders and riders then need to be reminded by the marshal, but you can say something like, hey, weapon up, because sometimes that does get forgotten. One of the things that a junior ground crew would do would be to simply then go up to the Quintain and reset it. And there are specific ways to reset a quintain. It isn't a straight on shot. But that would be something that you would be shown in a ground crew class in person so that you could get a really good feel for how it should be. Sir William, could you elaborate on why it is at an angle and not straight on?
Right, it's because the levee of the lance is dropped, the levee, the lowering of the lance is done across the horse's neck, and therefore the angle of approach isn't straight forward of the horse, it's at a few degrees off that. So the quintain target needs to be rotated slightly off so that the lance and the target are hit on the same plane, is really what's happening. It's the same plane that a jouster in crench, the shield that they wear, would be on that same plane as well.
Right, here is an example of a javelin being handed up. So you'll notice in this one, when she handed up the jousting, the actual big lance, the point of it was not sharp, but the point was up. And in this one, the point is down when she hands it. And safety is our greatest concern in this manner, because we have to make sure that wherever the pointy end is, it is in the direction that can do the least amount of damage if something goes wrong. And one of the things that equestrians have to consider every time they do this is, what's the worst thing that could happen and how can we try to not have that happen? So this is a ring lance. It is much longer than the javelin. And you'll note, you can kind of see in this video that the pointy side is up instead of down. It is well away from the horse and it's well away from the rider. So in some instances, the rider would need to get rid of the rings prior to that. And so what you just saw is one way of having the ground crew get the rings off without having to take the entire lance. It's better for the rider to hang onto the lance instead of having to pass it back and forth again.
And we think, looking at this, where I hold the lance, we swap, each of take turn holding it to allow the rings to drop off the end of the lance. You look at that and logical mind says this is the obvious and only way that you would hand rings down on a ring lance. But I was at an event a couple of years ago back east when the rider approaching the ground crew lowered the lance, tipped down toward them to allow the rings to slide off the end of the lance for them to catch. And that was, to me, the most insane thing I'd ever seen anybody do while riding at somebody, was to lower the point of the lance at them with the complete belief and understanding that they could control the lance and the horse under that circumstance and no one was going to die. And when I pointed out that I thought this was crazy, everybody looked at me like I was from another planet. So there is no assumption. That's why we teach. There is absolutely no assumption about that whatever they're doing is safe. It needs to be addressed. You don't just make it up as you go along. That's why we teach these classes.
So ring lances, or the ring stands, are often very tall. And while Shawned is, about almost 5'9", 5'8", here's an example of one way to be able to get rings back up on the stand. We use magnets with ours. And so we're able to just, it's wire, then wrapped in tape. And then we just have a magnet up there to help it. Our heads, which is sometimes used with lances, but most of the time with swords, are set up in such a way that you can go ahead and just set them on top. So here is our heads run. And so you'll note on that one that as he was writing, he had the point of the sword down. It could have been either down like that or up back over his shoulder. And then as he approached, he put it back up so that the ground crew was able to approach. All right, so those are just some very specific examples of some of the things that you'll see on an equestrian field. In the heads, it might be that the person is done, they've gone through the heads, and then they need the ground crew support to go stick the heads back up on there. It might be an entire field where they do many different weapons, changing weapons as they go, and then you wouldn't reset the field until the whole thing was done. There is going to be a senior equestrian marshal that's in charge of the area, and they are the safety officer. So much like any officer that we have in the SCA, they are very much a safety officer. And so that senior equestrian marshal will be the one to make the call for when a rider can start the course. And you'll hear things that may sound like, you know, rider on course or heads run or quintain calling out that specific activity so that everybody is aware of where the horse is going to go. They would make a course clear call for when ground crew can come out and reset or pick up horse poop or anything like that. But you would want to listen for that course clear call before you went into the area. And hold is actually a universal call. So we use hold in the equestrian world as well. The thing to remember, here's our caveat with horses, is that a rider might not be able to stop their horse right away. And so if you hear a hold called, you need to stop, but you also need to be looking around, making sure that where you've stopped is not where an unfortunate out of control horse might be headed. And so those are one of those, like, you just have to be aware. As a teacher, you know, what we were always told, you got to have eyes in the back of your head. You got to have like eyes like 360 when you're working around horses, because they're prey animals and they might spook at something that scared them. My Arab Trask, the first time he saw a battle, we were several football fields away, and it was an acorn war, and he saw this big group of people moving together, and then suddenly there was crashing and there was yelling and then we were gone. So he was like, no, I'm done. That's good. I'm done with this. So you got to just keep your eye open for that.
And on the adding to the conversation about the safety and the situation, the marshals on an equestrian field, it's not hyperbole to say that it's arguably the most dangerous activity done in the SCA, or at least potentially dangerous activity. You know, you get more injuries in hard suit fighting on a day-to-day basis, but you get much worse injuries involved with horses. And a runaway horse or a person with weapons on a horse out of control is a truly terrifying and dangerous possibility, which is why you're always watching, you're always aware. There is no time that you're out there that you just stop paying attention. You can't, there's no point on the field that not looking is an option. So you really need to be willing to take that on, even as ground crew. You can't ignore what's happening, because the place that you're standing that you consider to be completely safe and nowhere near the activity isn't always that.
And we are by no means like trying to scare people. The horses are wonderful, and most of the time they're calm and happy, and they like what they do. But it's that little tiny chance where this, 12 to 1,500 pound horse decides that they don't want to be there anymore. And it's very small, so don't be afraid if you want to be involved. But your equestrians are happy to help you learn so that you can see something building before it ever blows up. So a couple of things, and I've brought this up now several times, horses are prey animals. They can be spooked. And so I don't know if you've ever seen like the old cowboy movies where the cowboys they move slowly and they move predictably and they speak softly and slowly. And because that's what horses like, they like predictability. And so if you've got someone who is rushing or charging or sneaking or creeping, that sets off their like red lights and warning signals. Keep an eye on their expressions. Again, you're looking at their ears, you're looking at their eyes, you're looking at their nostrils, and you can see people who are really tense, and you can see the same thing in a horse. You can see a horse that's tense. Their muscles are tight, they're twitchy, so you can see that as well. So that's their body language. And always listen to the rider or the senior equestrian marshal, because the rider might be busy, but riders know their horses best. And so if somebody says, "Oh, I need you to step back yet," even though he's standing still, I need you to just wait because he's not calm yet. And so always listen to that rider as you're doing this work.
And then there's the basic question, what scares a horse? And the flippant answer people will toss out on anything, but what scares a horse is difference. That what bothers them and scares them and makes them most nervous is difference, something that isn't what was there a moment ago. So suddenly something appearing on a bag blowing through the wind, grocery bag going across the field in the wind, will set off some horse somewhere on that property. They will. That's just going to happen. So when you see something happening that is obviously different from what you expect to be happening there, you can assume the horse is equally going to be bothered by it.
So if you are ever at an event and somebody has lost one, honestly, those plastic grocery bags are the devil. I think every horse in the world thinks that it will kill them. And even Orion has been known to shy at a plastic grocery bag. And so if you see something like that in an event, snag it, please. It will help. So I have these links here, and I will also put them in the chat. But there is an SCA newcomer portal for equestrian work. We have Mr. William wrote an article, so that's called "So You Want to Have Horses at Your Event," and I will let him kind of talk just the basics of what are in it.
Yeah, it's basically just a checklist overview to allow event stewards to understand what steps they have to take to make it possible for horses to be at an event. I put it together several years ago, borrowing from many sources that already existed. I just wanted to have one basic unit. If you ever actually are planning an event and you do want to make them horse friendly, it's a good article to have.
We're also required to have added insurance, and we have to order that. It does cost extra, but we do have that. And that insurance is, it covers the SCA. Then there is an antir.sca.wiki's Facebook page. The TerraPomaria.Equestrian officer is Her Ladyship, Tassi Hestamader. I can never say that. Hestamader. And that is her email address. And then I am actually in my second year, not that this has been much of a year, as the Kingdom Equestrian officer. And so that is our email address for Antir. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see this again. And I'm going to put these, actually, the links into the chat. But does anybody have any questions about any of this?
I'll go. Hi,
Thank you.
this is Eleanor. And so my question is, as a ground crew possibility, are there things like I should be thinking of for my person itself? Like, is there garb that I should or should not use? Is there special shoes that I should be thinking about? Do I need gloves? I mean, like, are there equipment that I should wear or not wear that makes the world better for everyone?
Those are great questions. We wear dresses or pants, so that doesn't really matter. I prefer to wear pants, but the big thing is your shoes. And so I'll say this, and then there are people who will do it, but you never wear open-toed shoes around horses. If a horse were to accidentally step on your foot, which happens, and you have an open-toed shoe on, you have opportunity to have a really big hospital bill. The hooves do a lot.
The same applies to moccasins or
Yes.
things like that. Anything that doesn't protect your foot from above and just as importantly from below is a bad idea.
So we've got, you know, nice solid leather boots. We have both tall ones and short ones, and then we also have thick leather, like riding shoes. And so that thick leather will protect. It's still going to hurt. I was wearing my boots and got stepped on and my toe got broken, but it didn't actually remove my toe from my foot. So, so that's that kind of boot. Clothing that might flap around in the wind is not helpful with the horses. That sudden, again, spontaneous movement can look like a predator coming to them. And so while the dress I have that I can ride in is a full circle skirt, my sleeves are not flashy, you know, they're tight, and the skirt itself is heavy enough that it's not going to flip around in the wind.
I have others.
Go ahead.
You use to protect yourself from the sun. Parasols, large hats, they're good ideas to have, but when you're approaching horses, don't do it with a parasol in your hand. And if you're going to wear big hats, make sure they stay on your head and don't go blowing away as you're walking past a horse. Again, that's just like a bag going by. It's different, and they don't like it.
So no veils.
Veils are not a problem. No, they're not bothered by sunglasses and things like that. They're not bothered by veils either. That's not really an issue.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing you'd want to worry about is making sure that the veil is fastened well so that it can't go flying.
Great, thank you.
What about?
She had asked about gloves. Some of the game stuff is metal and it gets hot in the sun, and you could also have splinters, so gloves are important.
Gloves are a good idea, absolutely.
I was just going to add that I always have a pair of leather palmed gloves in my pocket when I'm I have a 3-year-old Mustang, because if you need to grab anything, a rope, that's going to give you extra grip, and God forbid a horse pulls on a rope and rips it out of your hand, you're going to get a nasty burn. So having a pair of gloves with a leather palm is a really nice idea.
And I found out sunblock helps because my forearms were very red.
Yeah, horse events are notoriously bad about for people forgetting to put sunblock or protection from the sun and forgetting to drink water. Those are the two things that people tend to overlook while they're out there doing things that can get you in trouble. That's a slightly different subject, but it does, I guess, qualify as clothing when you're talking about sunblock. Protect yourself from the sun. Absolutely.
Okay, in Kaid, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a few years with the rings. We, well away from ground crew, the rider would put the point down, drop the rings onto the ground, and then point up and hand it off. But I will mention how you do it and see if they want to try that.
Yeah, I mean, that method is 100% safe. So that's a perfectly useful way. If you couldn't, I don't know if you could tell in the videos exactly how what we were doing works, but you have the rings on the top of your hands where you've kept them, because that's why you do a ring run. You don't let them go over your wrist. They're on the top of your hand. So you hold out the lance and they take the lance here. You let go and the rings drop onto their hand, and then you pick up the lance and then they drop off the bottom. It's completely safe as well. The only danger involved is the danger of being close to a horse in the first place. So it's and you don't have to keep gathering them up from the dirt and then putting them back up again. In a long day, every time you have to reach down and pick stuff up off the ground, it's just adding to how tired you're going to be when it's done. So we found this method worked quite well.
Try to keep it so that our ground crew doesn't get so exhausted that they never want to come help us again.
I guess we're out of questions.
Well, in Kaid, I've never done anything before or after a procession, but Great Western War, one day they do a practice for a castle charge. The next day they do the castle charge. And they always have somebody who is volunteered by Thor, because I wear a Thor's hammer. I follow behind them with the rolling bucket and the pitchfork because it's on the battlefield. And
it's
I've
a job
actually,
that you're throwing through encampments, unlike a lot of places. Well, actually, this has changed mostly in the SCA now. When we first got back into the SCA and started doing horses, part of the reason that equestrians are accused of being standoffish is because they're forced to stand off. They're most of the time, all the horse activities were over there. When you wear the horses, they're over there. Just see that? Over that way. And because they wanted to keep it separate from everything else. So it really wasn't necessary to clean up after your horses because everyone was in the horse area and the horses never left that. A few years after, or actually the year after we got in, I started trying to change that at events I ran, and I tried to make the entire event site the horse site. So we would ride between our camp and the field and right past Merchants Row and all. When we started doing that, someone coming along behind and cleaning up became an absolute necessity. And just not just doing processions, but just when you're traveling. And if you don't have someone in your entourage or at your camp that's sorry, I got to come back and take care of that. So you have to get off your horse and leave it with somebody else and go back and clean it yourself. That's the reenactment aspect of horses in the SCA is not as well accepted in that particular sense as it probably could be. And I don't really blame people for it.
Yeah. And that is one of the things that's on you want to have horses at your event. We determined that it was just a lot easier to have everybody at gate sign the equestrian waiver. So if you are going to do that, even if you're going to keep the horses separate, just to keep everything just way above board, it's just if you're at an equestrian event, you're going to sign an equestrian waiver. And so
the fencing off, the securing of the equestrian activity area, if you look at Anna's background there, you can see that's from the property here in Almsville that we have, the event site. And you can see a clearly defined equestrian area with no fencing or lines put up around it. You can walk right onto it from the offside, but it's clearly visually distinguished from what is not equestrian activity area. So nobody walks out onto that field by mistake. They don't understand, oh, I didn't realize that this is where horses rode, because it's really obvious. And the little ropes that we put up to block things off don't block off horses. If horses want to run away, they're going through those ropes and they're going to take the ropes with them all the way across the field until it tangles around something and they fall on their faces. So I prefer not to use them. It's just a much better thing. But that's the separation. When we have weapons, when we have marshals, when we have people riding at speed, it's done there. And the rest of the riding is limited to walking your horse. We don't canter through the camps. We don't go. Every time we find somebody doing that, we jump on them quickly and say, no, that's not how we do it. But I can do it safely. It's perfectly fine. But that person there with their 3 small children doesn't understand that. And I don't necessarily buy it either. So we don't ride anything above a walk outside of that field where all the fast riding takes place.
I always hear Dame Maka's voice in my head. She's passed on now, but the safety first, and it's for everybody, so even if somebody gets like short or like, no, I need you to back off, it's nothing to do with that they're a horrible person. It's really because they're worried about everybody's safety.
Great Western War, Kaid, at least 5 or 6 years ago, bought a whole bunch of the metal fencing So that war starts either Tuesday or Wednesday, except for people who are told to volunteer, and we go Sunday and set up the equestrian arena.
Yeah.
They actually have the fences all the way around and the stalls for horses.
Yeah, if you have the money to invest in something like that, it's great. We can set up temporary stalls for multiple horses here on our property, but I couldn't begin to go around that field with it. No, it just would never reach. It wouldn't even be, the cost of that would completely exorbitant.
And we're allowed to store them on the site of Great Western War.
Yeah.
I don't know how much that costs, but there's this Connex box, so they can leave stuff on the site all year long.
Yeah, the advantage of permanent sites cannot be overestimated.
So I have a question about volunteering as ground crew. I'm not new to the SCA, but I am new to the equestrian part of the SCA. Is it preferable to contact someone, and if so, who would that someone be before the event and say, hey, I'm available as ground crew? Or can you just, go strolling up and say, hey, who's in charge of equestrian?
So most places that have active equestrian groups actually have practices as well. And the practices are really a nice place to learn about it, because people have more time. Their horses amp up when they get to events. Even our horses, which have done it many times, they go, Orion goes from a 6 to a 9, and Jupe, I don't know what Jupe's numbers are, but so practices are much more laid back. People can spend time like showing and learning. And then if you're authorized at a practice, it's really easy to then show up to an event and say, hey, I'm here to help. How can I help? And there are some events that won't do authorizations just because of how big they are, or how busy they are, or how many people they have there. And so if you have the ability to find a practice, I would recommend that. But if you are at an event, it's got horses, I would find the equestrian marshal in charge and ask, is there a way I can help and get, can I do junior ground crew? I'm interested in doing this, and then just see what they say. But I can tell you, for me, anybody comes up to me and asks me at a horse event if they can help, I will spend the time teaching them what they need to know right then and there, so that they can help us with the event.
But pretty much every event, that a horse event or events that have horses added, there's somebody there who's overseeing part of the. You want to have horses at your event workup. Is someone has to be assigned that job. Someone has to look out for the equipment. Where do you park your trailer? Where we set up our camp? The marshal controls the field, but there's somebody who is overseeing the horse activities, and that's almost always published well before the event happens. And if you want to be volunteer in advance, that's the person to talk to. And when you show up, the marshal in charge will point you to that person, or that person will point you to the marshal in charge to decide which of those are going to be. But if you're already authorized to be ground crew, you walk up and say, hey, I'm here and I'm gonna do ground crew, and they'll put you right on the field. That's just, they'll always, yes, they'll find a job for you.
Okay. I think, I need to figure out how to get authorized to be ground crew. So I think I'll hook up with my local equestrian group, which we haven't done in person because of the pandemic. But thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
And anything else?
So hi, this is Eleanor. If you hear that there's going to be horses at an event and you're super excited, is there a way, do you bring treats for the horses, or is there a way to say thank you for the equestrian community for all the time and effort?
So yes, and offer them to the riders, and then carrots are always popular. And so if you would like to do that, the riders would be ecstatic to accept that. And then they might let you feed their horses, depending on their horses. And again, going back to, please don't just feed the horses the stuff. But yeah, we've had that happen before, where somebody's just come up with this huge bag of carrots, like, here, these are for all the horses, have at it. And it was greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and it really is the don't feed the horses. Can continue with that? Don't approach the horses without the owner's presence, or at least permission cleared in the first. You don't walk up to horses. Just as an example, because we have a few seconds. I was doing a presentation somewhere, and after the presentation was over, this was a non-SCA activity, but people were told you can go back to the stables and meet the horses that were doing the show. And while I was turned away from my horse, a woman grandmother with her toddler granddaughter brought the kid up to give a treat to my horse. This was Orion, and she put her little tiny hand out with a carrot in it, and he took her entire arm up to about there in his mouth, flat like that. And he worked it around, finding the carrot, and then spit it out. And the child was giggling like a maniac, and grandma, I thought, was going to die right on the spot, because he could have snapped off the end of her hand without any effort whatsoever. The bite force of a horse is terrifying. He didn't want to hurt her. He just overestimated how much arm he really needed to have to get to the tree. But if it had not been Orion, if it had been an actual, troubled horse, or terrible things can happen. And the owner knows which horses you can approach and which horses you should not approach. Don't ever assume. Always find the owner. Always ask.
I'm glad you mentioned because I don't remember ever being told this. Look at their eyes, the ears, the nostrils.
Yeah, to really understand that, you need to spend time with horses and with someone who can translate the body language, because it is a language, and you understanding the sounds they make, recognizing the difference between a nicker that's of interest and they're being sweet versus the huffing sound that they make when they're nervous about something and they're trying to alert the rest of the herd that there's something to be concerned about. That's a horse that's got an issue with something, versus the blowing sound that they make, where they blow out energy, and it sounds very much alike, but one is the exact opposite of the other. One is relaxation and the other is nervousness. And if you don't know what those are, then you're not going to guess correctly. It's very helpful to go out with people who know horses, and if you have a active horse community in your world, they'd love to show their horses off and talk about them. We're the same way. I do this for a living. I train riders and horses for a living, but SCA people can come and learn about horses with me for nothing. Just about what you should and should not do around them, all of that. Want to learn to be a rider or become a better rider or whatever, that's a different issue. But at least getting to know the horses, we'd love to pass that information along.
And horses are truly one of the more emotionally intelligent animals, and their communication level for body language is so high that if you're not really paying attention, you can't see it. So it's great to learn that from other people. A single glance from the guy who's in charge of our herd sends the rest of them going, and we're like, what just happened? So we didn't catch it, but it really is very subtle. And so the more experience you can get just being around them, the better.
And it's conducive to just better health. I mean, spending time around horses is good for people. That old saying that the best thing for the inside of a man is the outside of a horse.
Well, after ground crew for a whole bunch of years, people said, well, you should rent the horse on a Saturday. I think it was like $20, try different horses. Ben was big enough to slump me around, and he was better trained than the idiot rider. And then Sunday, I don't remember the event, whether it was a baronial or kingdom or whatever, $150 to rent Ben. And I hadn't checked the weather. I was wearing lightweight stuff, and I was turning blue and freezing. But I gave Ben up and I went home. And then a couple months later, a lady's riding, horse stumbled. She took a tumble and wound up breaking her tailbone. I says, my feet are staying on the ground. I retired Navy, and I work as contract security. So if I'm broken, I don't get a paycheck.
No, I'm pretty much the same way. And yeah, I used to bounce really well, and these days I don't bounce as well as I used to. But I also raced motorcycles for years, and it was very funny when I told my mother that I was going to get into training horses for a living and get off of motorcycles, and she was thrilled. I said, I'm going to train green horses to be ridden, and you think that's better than riding motorcycles? Yeah, but enough of that.
So we
Any other-
have about 4 minutes left that was slated for this. And so are there any other questions? The whole training horses to do all of this is an entirely different topic and it would be very difficult to show on a video. We could try it, but that's also here.
Where would I find my equestrian marshals and my equestrian practices? Not every branch is going to have an equestrian program going within it.
So I have, so if you're in Antir, I put in the chat, there's a Facebook link for Antir equestrians. And I know almost all the other kingdoms have something similar. And within our Facebook page, I think most of the marshals are in there. And, but they're also the SCA site for Antir has an equestrian section. And so between those two places, you'll be able to find an email. You could email me if you're in Antir and I can find out your person if you need to. And then again, every kingdom has a kingdom equestrian officer if they have an active equestrian community. If they don't, then they don't.
And pretty much every region of the United States has Facebook groups specifically for those regions. Even if sometimes they're not a single kingdom, sometimes they cover an entire multitude of kingdoms and that are, you know, in those places with high populations and smaller areas. But the Facebook groups are emails, at least in the last year or so, have been a hit and miss prospect for getting information back. Facebook and similar activities are good sources for information, and there's very active groups all across the country.
Arabella, the Kingdom Equestrian Officer, used to live in the Shire of Dark in the Kingdom of Kaid. And when she moved to Colorado, at least 90, maybe 100% of the equestrian game stuff moved with her because it was hers. I'm going to ask if they want to do a fundraiser. I'll donate money, buy the stuff, make it so when you can start practice, you have that.
And if you're interested in those sort of building elements and stuff, I do a lot of that. I built all the elements you're looking at in that background up there. I built them on a regular basis. I don't have plans for any of this stuff, but I have pictures and breakdowns of how I built them without just, you know, this is a piece of this is a 4x4, this is a round, it's approximately this high, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I have that information. If you just contact me on Facebook, I can pass that on to you too.
I also just put his email address in there. So
There you go.
because he'll answer his email.
Yeah, I do. All right. Thanks, folks.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.